distinguished panelists, to our distinguished panelists, and of course, to all those who are joining us in this Zoom call here in the United States and overseas as well. We are talking today about the Black Sea, a very important topic, that affects security, economics, energy, and much more regarding obviously Europe, NATO, etc. But first, let me just introduce myself. My name is Paolo von Schirach. I am the president of the Global Policy Institute, and I also serve as chair of political science and international relations at the Bay Atlantic University here in Washington, D.C. We are part of a larger international education network called BAU Global. And indeed, we are very pleased today to have as one of our distinguished panelists, Professor Yayci from Istanbul, who teaches at Bahçeşehir University, which is sort of the foundational stone, if you wish, of this network, starting in Turkey and with other affiliates in Germany and the UK and Canada and Georgia and Northern Cyprus, etc. So, but I want to thank all the participants for being here today and for helping us to shed light on these complex problems. What prompted us to hold this session is obviously concern about the possibilities that the revving up of tensions in areas in the proximity to the Black Sea may have negative, reverberating effects that will affect the security of Eastern Europe, of the Balkans, of NATO, and of course, Turkey being, I suppose, the main, not the only, but certainly the main country with a very long shoreline, a NATO country with a long shoreline on the Black Sea and the custodian, if you wish, of the straits that allow movement of goods and vessels across the Marmara Sea, the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus, in and out of the Black Sea. So it's very important strategic location and responsibility. So without further ado, I would like to get started. I'll dispense with reading the bios of our panelists. All the participants have received in their invitations the descriptions of their titles and careers and many accomplishments. So I will, for the sake of time, I will dispense with that. But I want to just give a special thanks to my good friend and colleague Arnold, who has been really in the lead in this effort and who has done the real work in putting together this panel and talking to his friends and colleagues, and of course a man with direct experience, Arnold himself, and in this field, in this particular region. And so we will hear from everybody. I think that the first question I would like to ask the panel, and I will start with you, Professor Yayci, it would be, as you are kind of there, on the spot, so to speak. So I thought it would be fitting to give you the first cut at all this, to ask you as a general question, and then ask the others as well, how do you see the security environment in the Black Sea region now, especially, of course, in the aftermath of what we all know that something happened a few years ago, which is the Russian occupation and then annexation of Crimea, and additionally the militarization. I guess this is not the only issue, but certainly it's what comes to mind. So from a Turkish perspective, both in terms of security, economy, and the unrestricted flow of energy from east to west to Europe, how do you view all this? Do you see reasons for major concerns, or is it kind of under control? Professor Yayci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schirach, Professor Schirach. Thank you very much for inviting me, for having me in this conference. Thank you very much. So I would like to give a vision, give an, a feeling about the Turkish view on Black Sea security issues. First of all, let me share my, I have a small presentation I prepared for you. So you can see it, right now?
Yes, thank you, yes.
Okay, so for Turkey, for Black Sea region or around the region or for the globe, main principles are peace and stability in the region, in the world. So the founder of our republic, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, says, peace at home, peace at world. So peace in world. So, but in the region, there are economic imbalances. There are illegal immigration problems. There are illegal trafficking. There are terrorism around the region, but not mainly in Black Sea. What are the principles of the Turkish Republic? We look over whole region, especially for the Black Sea, from the end of the Cold War. Regional cooperation, interoperability, and mutual confidence. We have a naval policy, especially for Black Sea. The efforts and active participation of neighboring and regional countries in regional initiatives are very important for global and regional confidence and security building measures, as well as situational awareness. Turkey initiated maritime security initiatives and maritime situational awareness for Black Sea at the just end of the Cold War, collapse of Soviet Union, just at that point. So, first of all, we look stability and balance in Black Sea. I should mention mainly Montreux Convention. Montreux Convention is the main issue for the stability, security, and balance and peace in this region. Why? Sometimes I hear, I witness, I read some articles, some speeches, some conversations, or some books, which say that Montreux Convention is limiting the non-literal countries or the powers to enter the Black Sea maritime era. But it is not true, because there are some limitations in Montreux Convention for entering Black Sea of non-literal states, and there are some capacities, limits for them. But including United States, they are using only 12% of their limits. So they are not still using 88% of their limits. So it is not true. It is not a limitation for entering Black Sea. By the way, on the other hand, Montreux Convention mainly is limiting the power projection of Russia. And during the Cold War, Soviet Union, from Black Sea to Mediterranean. Why? With respect to Montreux Convention articles, Russia or any littoral states around Black Sea cannot pass their submarines and aircraft carriers. So that's why, which is the warmest sea of Russia is Black Sea. So they are not constructing big ship yachts for constructing submarines and also aircraft carriers, because Montreux Convention is an hindrance for them. If they construct any aircraft carriers over there, they cannot pass through the straits. So this is an advantage for the Europe, for the Western world, and for NATO, for alliance. So it's a good security argument, instrument. So on the other hand, Black Sea is a closed sea, which with respect to the Montreux Convention, and it is limiting non-littorals and littorals navy powers in the sea. So it's a very effective and also very security producing agreement, convention. By the way, it is a it is a sacrifice of Turkey by obeying Montreux Convention. Please, let's note it, because with respect to the international maritime law, those straits are not international waterways. They are national straits, because Istanbul Strait, we are not using Bosphorus or Dardanelles. These are national namings. Istanbul Strait and Çanakkale Strait are the national straits, not international straits, because they connect open seas to inner sea, which is Marmara Sea. Marmara Sea is an inner sea, and inner water regime should be applied with respect to international law. So that's why a strait which connects an open sea to internal waters is a national strait. Marmara Sea is an internal waters of Turkey. So Turkey is sacrificing some sovereign rights for the international and regional security, stability, and peace aims. So let's note it. That's why it is Montreux Convention is not limiting the sovereignty of Turkey. It is just arranging the passage regime. It is very important. We have undiscussable sovereign rights over straits and over Marmara Sea. This is just an international agreement which is arranging the passage regime over the straits and over Marmara Sea. Turkey did a great job after the Cold War. Turkey initiated Black Sea 4. It is a combination of whole littoral states, navies, to conduct together exercises and some operations. So Black Sea 4 was being activated twice a year just before Ukraine crisis. Georgian crisis and Ukraine crisis, put some problems for the activation of Black Sea 4. But Black Sea 4 is a great success. Why? Because we are Black Sea 4, we prepared littoral states for NATO procedures. I was an officer at that time in 2001, and I witnessed all the process, all the period, all the development issues. So please let me say something. Whole nations, whole states, whole navies, except Turkey, they were speaking Russian. They were speaking Russian. And whole documents of whole navies, except Turkey, were in Russian. And Russian styles, Russian documents, and Russian type navies. But Turkey forced them, motivated them to use English for the naval communication and naval operations system and so forth. And Turkey made documents which are very similar to NATO documents for the use of those littoral states. Even Russian Navy used those documents and used those styles and all kinds of things in NATO style. So afterwards, Bulgaria and Romania easily became NATO members. Ukraine and Georgia have got used to become a familiar member of NATO. They are very close to become a member of NATO in Navy. So, but, those whole ones were in Russian, but after the Black Sea 4, they were just using the English, documents and orders and so forth, styles and everything. Afterwards, in 2006, we initiated another Operation Black Sea Harmony, which was about the maritime situational awareness. And almost all data with respect to the maritime situational awareness were supplied by Operation Black Sea Harmony to NATO headquarters. So it is still a very enormous service for NATO. It is the biggest support for NATO. We are getting whole information even from Russia. We are supplying all those data to NATO headquarters. And also,
Professor, sorry for the interruption. If you could kind of condense this so that we can allow other panelists to come in, or maybe you can come back to this later. I don't know.
Okay. So at the end, straits are very important also for economic issues, because 3 million barrels petroleum is passing through the straits daily. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
But thank you, and I guess that's kind of, thank you for that overview, because that sets the stage for the for the context, at least the broader context, and it's very illuminating to see the role that Turkey has been playing over so many years in trying to stabilize the region. Margarita, I would go to you now to say whatever you need to say regarding the security and energy, concerns in the region, in the light of what Professor Yayci has said and other observations you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me today. It's a very interesting panel indeed. Well, the main concerns in the Black Sea are now, after 2014, that one Black Sea country invaded another Black Sea country. And in 2008, Russia also invaded parts of Georgia. So here we have one Black Sea country that has control over territories of two of its neighbors, and both countries are at the moment Black Sea countries. Moldova is also in one way or another connected to the Black Sea region because of close contact, close relationship with Moldova. So always we put in geographical terms, not only the literal countries, but also Moldova in that equation about Black Sea stability because of the protracted continuing conflict in Transnistria in Moldova and the dangers that it creates. So this is the main problem that all of these Black Sea cooperation organizations have at the moment. How could they function? How could they be constructive and reliable in cooperation with NATO when there is such a conflict on their hands, when they are prevented from delivering proper work and good work because of the conflict? Then you have the energy dimension, which is also very important because the Russian pipelines Russian plans to build pipelines in the Black Sea have been very aggressive back since 2006. First was starting with South Stream that was supposed to link Russia to Bulgaria, to the Black Sea city of Burgas, and from there go to Serbia and Hungary and all the way to Austria. And now with the replacement of it, a smaller pipeline, 50% of the plant capacity of South Stream, the Turk Stream pipeline that is connecting Russia with Western Turkey. And from there, one branch is going to go, it's already going to Bulgaria, but it's also going to connect to Serbia, Hungary, and all the way to Austria. These aggressive plans to build pipeline through the Black Sea, although they benefit Turkey, particularly Blue Stream benefited Turkey in the past. It's a quick and close connection with Russia, direct supply, nothing wrong with that. But with the transit that is now planned by Turk Stream 2 all the way to Central Europe, there is a significant problem because, as we mentioned said in our previous meetings, Russian pipeline projects are creating a pincer movement with Nord Stream 2 and Nord Stream 1 from the north going to Germany, and Turk Stream going from Russia to Turkey and to Central and Eastern Europe, pretty much encircling Central and Eastern Europe and squeezing those countries and preventing them from developing regional energy markets and from having alternative gas supplies from other countries. So here we go. We have an aggressor among the Black Sea countries, and we are not confronting that aggressor the way we should. All of the Black Sea countries, plus the United States and Western Europe, because this situation is not sustainable. It endangers the stability and security of the entire region. And as much as some of the countries are trying to do everything possible to maintain that peace and stability, and NATO is trying to build forces around the Black Sea shores and have presence in the Black Sea, this situation is going to continue being being dangerous for the peace and for the stability of all of the countries in the region. Russia is creating a military bubbles around the Black Sea, shores. We have one in Crimea with Iskander weapons and so on. We have another one in Armenia. We have Russian peacekeepers in the Caucasus now in Azerbaijan, another military bubble in the Caspian Sea, and then another one in, also a couple more in the Mediterranean. And these military bubbles are also endangering the entire region, including Turkey and the Mediterranean. Denying NATO, creating conditions that are going to deny NATO access to certain parts of the world where its allies are located, such as Georgia, for example. Which is an aspiring member, or right now it's a very dedicated partner. It's going to be an extremely dangerous situation for NATO to deal with as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you for this juxtaposition. Professor Dorondo, to you, give us your own perspective as a scholar focusing on, as you indicated earlier, on Central Europe and Eastern Europe, and how do you view now, this, these evolutions in terms of the security for the Black Sea region?
I have to say that I subscribe to the view that NATO's and the European Union's attention regarding Black Sea security issues, whether economic, political, or military, geostrategic, are relatively late in coming. It is, I think, a welcome development that exercises such as Defender Europe 2020 and Defender Europe 21 have taken place and indeed are underway as we speak, in the case of Defender Europe 21. I am particularly interested in the development of the 3 Seas initiative as a non-military sort of counterbalance, if you will, to Russian and even Chinese geoeconomic and geostrategic penetration of the greater Black Sea region. I find it very interesting that the 3 Seas initiative, to a certain extent, at least superficially, brings to mind Pilsudski's, for example, Intermarium of the 1920s and 30s, and even Adam Chernovitsky's discussions during the Tsarist period. I think it is very important as regards the 3 Seas initiatives undertaking in the Black Sea region that there is now U.S. participation in support of the 3 Seas initiative, not only diplomatically and politically, but also monetarily. I think it is also very interesting and potentially significant that there be German participation as well. There is some reluctance, of course, as many of the audience members no doubt know, among some members of the 3 Seas initiative countries to greater German participation, not least because the German economy is nearly twice as large as all of the 3 SI members' economies combined. And active German participation at an official level would, I think, cause some disquiet among other members of the 3 SI. Nevertheless, I think that German participation is logical, and I think it would be, in the long term, a beneficial adjunct to the 3 SI, along with increasing American participation as well, to offset the non-military aspects of Russian and Chinese activities in the greater Black Sea region.
Thank you. Daniel, so tell us how you see things from from the perch of California. That where the Black Sea is really far away, but we're all in this together, as we understand, as at least as a NATO alliance. And let me just ask you, just also maybe a somewhat provocative question: is Crimea forever a done deal? In other words, Crimea has been taken over, and that's it. And however we may protest, and however we may insist on keeping sanctions on Russia until it relinquishes the ill-gotten gains. But this is a done deal, and we kind of decided that that's the way it is, even though we're not talking about it openly.
So first of all, thank you for organizing this. Thank you for Arnie also for playing a central role in organizing this. From my perspective, Professor Yayci, good night, and from my perspective. So look, I'm originally a mathematician, so I look for unifying themes. I always look for unifying themes. When we find complexity, we say, oh, look, that's an interesting unifying theme. So whatever we find is interesting. And we do that at the Naval Postgraduate School because we want to train our students to understand complexity and the world they live in and how to approach it. So let me step back to three themes that describe Russia that my colleagues have heard before, but I'll say them again. In my view, Russia is very simple to understand. They want three things. They want strategic depth. That is, they understand how to spell Napoleon and they understand how to spell Hitler. So they want strategic depth. That includes maritime. Secondly, they want respect, or you might say a seat at the table. They prefer to have the gavel when they're sitting at the table, but they always want respect. And the third thing they want is a warm water port. So if you start with those, you won't go far wrong in understanding Russia. Now, Professor Yayci said that Turkey is interested in peace and stability in the region and doing those things to create that environment. I would not say the same about Russia. I would say that given their circumstances and given their history, they're forever interested in stirring the pot until the pieces are rearranged to get their form of peace and stability. So I think that's important to understand about Russia, and I think that there's a dissonance between what Russian aims are at the moment and what Turkish aims are at the moment. I think Margarita laid out the case for an aggressive Russia very clearly and correctly, in my view. Russian history is filled with exemplars of what she said, and so we shouldn't be surprised that we see more of it. We should not be surprised if we assume we will see more of it. That's what they do. And so one has to start with those assumptions and work up what one's goals are and how one wants to fashion plans to execute those goals in a world in which Russia acts as we've just said. I'm going to answer Paolo's question about Crimea. So my wife and I have this joke. All couples have their little jokes, right? Well, one of them is, yeah, that's true. It's always been true, and it'll be true until it's not true, right? There's very little that sort of lasts forever and ever, amen. Crimea has moved back and forth. I just finished reading Tim Snyder's The Bloodlands, and of course the people, yeah, right. Of course the people, among the people who are moved around are the inhabitants of Crimea. This goes on and on and on, and so I think for the moment, Paolo, the West has said, we don't like it, we'll hold it against them, but we're not going to beat the war drums because of it. But when there's an opportunity, the world will change again, and we'll see what happens. But,
all right. Well, thank you for this sobering considerations. And,
I thought it was optimistic.
That's, yeah, sobering, but how can I say, thought-provoking and all that. Arnie, to you the honor of giving us, after having listened to our colleagues here, your perspective on how you see things going, and in particular, if you see any, going forward, as the guy said, predictions are always difficult, especially about the future, right? So please give us your thoughts about this the scenario and how you see this security situation regarding the Black Sea, and in particular, your thoughts on the observations that Margarita was making earlier regarding Russia's plans to sort of this aggressive pipeline construction, and of course, being the Black Sea being sort of a transit area. But that's also, it seems to me, tied to demand, right, for hydrocarbons in Europe. And,
Sure.
and give us your thoughts on that. I don't see demand growing dramatically that would absorb, huge new amounts of hydrocarbons. But give us your perspective on both the evolving security situation, given what's going on with Russia, and also Turkey's attempts to sort of to put water on the fire, if you wish. There's plenty of water in Black Sea, I guess, and also the energy concerns. Arnold.
Sure. Thanks, Paolo. And again, glad to be here with BAU GPI and with my colleagues on both sides of the Atlantic. Again, very glad to see and speak on the same panel with Admiral Yayci. I think we go back at least a year or so. But and of course my other colleagues from our NATO SAS work. So yeah, again, thanks for putting me in sort of the cleanup position, Paolo, because I have a lot of points I want to reinforce and emphasize that the previous speakers had touched on. I guess first of all, to get to the Admiral's initial points, was the Black Sea is a critical region with much larger geopolitical links, much more so than many other regions in the world, because in the Black Sea you have so many regional powers, Turkey being, of course, a regional power with a tremendous influence, and also Russia with its regional, but also its global influence. And then you have NATO and the US and the EU with their various aspects and influence also sort of wrapped into this. So you have a very dynamic region that we need to watch very closely, because it is quite a bit of volatility, and it plays a central role in a variety of areas for not just economics, but economics to include energy, security issues, all this tied into this region that sits at the confluence of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. So again, very dynamic, very potentially contentious area. So looking at it from that perspective, I think there's a tremendous amount of challenges that we see here. And again, arguably, I'd say this is probably one of the most difficult periods we've seen in the region in many years. It's always there's always something going on, and here we have multiple variables, multiple vectors underway that are challenging the overall stability of the region, and I would say more broadly into certainly global security challenges. So, looking at, again, Paolo, you asked me to talk about the energy component, and I couldn't think of a better person than Margarita to really highlight this. And the point that she made, which I want to emphasize, is that the pincer, that we're not seeing dramatic increases in demand from Europe. I think we all realize that it's probably going to either plateau and start to decrease over time. But that means that Russia will put additional emphasis on maintaining its hold on the region as far as a source of revenues. And Russia has proven that it will not give that up easily. So we're seeing we see with Nord Stream and now with Turk Stream, these two complementary pipelines, that this is Russia's way of reassembling the demand structure in their favor, and again maintaining that key position as a source for European energy. And then we're not just talking natural gas; we're also talking crude, coal, and refined products. So Russia has a tremendous stake in European demand, which is still, as we see a decline, there's still going to be tremendous demand from Europe going into the future for fossil fuels. That's just a natural given that we just can't change over the short term. and Russia wants to maintain that position. As Margarita said, they are very aggressive in maintaining this. And you know, on one hand, you understand Russia is determined to maintain their source of revenue, but the Europeans are also aiding and abetting this by continuing to purchase Russian oil and gas and coal and other products. So they're not making it that difficult for Russia to maintain this hold. You know, I realize I don't want to get too far into the European demand energy issue because it sort of detracts us from what we're talking about here. But this is all related to a certain extent in that European demand is still going to be high, relatively high, and Russia will do what it can to maintain that and satisfy that demand. So if we're talking about ways to maintain or to bring about stability, I think of course the easiest thing to say is we need to establish confidence building measures. That's easy to say, very hard to do. So, and I like what Dr. Dorondo mentioned earlier was the 3 Cs initiative. We need to rely on perhaps non-traditional methods. I think NATO, I would think on one hand, NATO would be a good, potentially good avenue, but because NATO is seen as such a potential threat to Russia, that may not be the best way to approach this. So I think 3 Cs, other, perhaps, like I said, non-traditional methods are good. I see Turkey as being a critical component of this. But I also, again, getting back to Dr. Dorondo, I think Germany has a tremendous role in this. And I think there's, again, a reluctance on Germany because of its own history to get heavily involved in these types of things. Also, other countries, as David mentioned, are reluctant to bring Germany in. But Germany, just by the virtue of its economic power and its growing political power in Europe, has just can't walk away from some of these regional challenges. I think the Black Sea is a place where Germany could have tremendous influence, working with the regional powers such as Turkey and Ukraine, and certainly some of the smaller powers could have a very potentially stabilizing influence in this. And you know, again, the details need to be developed on this because, of course, sitting in the background is the U.S. with its you know, its global and regional influence, but also the European Union, which Germany is. So there's multiple layers of this that we can apply. And if we want to get into some specifics, I don't want to take up too much time at this point, but I think, you know, as we mentioned, the 3 Cs initiative, as the Admiral mentioned, there's the Black Sea Harmony, some tangible existing organizations or methods that are already in place that can be used as really a starting point to try and reestablish some of these confidence building measures. And it's, as I said, easier said than done, but I think we need to start someplace, and using these existing tools is perhaps one way of doing this. So let me stop here, and you can, Paolo, you can continue with the
Sure.
With the discussion.
Actually, not to double down on what you just talked about energy issues, you, Arnold, and Margarita, we have a question from the audience asking about what the implications may be on the region of the softening, or so it appears, position of the Biden administration on Nord Stream 2. You know, much has been said in the last few days in the media about the fact that the Biden administration is not going to relentlessly sanction, you know, those managing the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and this is some kind of a green light, if you wish, or a kind of a subterraneous deal with Germany, whatever the speculations are. Do you see, all of you, this is a question to all of you, and to you, Admiral, too, who've been patiently now waiting, do you see any ramifications on the, in other words, does the eventual launching of Nord Stream 2, which, as we all know, is almost completed, but been delayed by sort of, how can I say, guerrilla warfare waged by the, you know, American Congress, whether it was Senator Cruz or or others, to delay. So eventually it looks like it's going to be built. Does that change anything in the broader picture of energy supplies? And in particular, does that change the calculus of the relevance of the Russian investments on pipelines affecting the region that we're talking about today, the Black Sea? Let's start with you, Admiral. Do you have any thoughts on this? And Margarita, I want to hear from you too. Thank you.
Yeah, for the pipelines, it is very important for Russia to construct pipelines and to export the energy resources and to Europe and the other regions. And so they are very aggressive too. So but the main point is Russia wants them to construct, but European countries, European states also want to get energy resources, energy from those pipelines. So this is a mutual interest between Russia and the others. So, but for the sake of safety of the straits, so pipelines is an alternative for the safety of the straits, because the in the history of the straits there has been many accidents, heavy accidents, and it was very dangerous for Istanbul. And one of the accidents in the Pentanta ship accident, which was an enormous tanker, it was a petroleum carrying ship. So that accident affected almost 15 years in the life of Istanbul. So that's why we are very careful about the safety of the straits and the metropolitan city of Istanbul. So that's why, but in any way, Russia shouldn't be the first energy supplier of Europe. This is very important. Other alternatives should be created instead of Russia. So that's
it. Well, thank you, Professor. Margarita, maybe you can give us further elaborations on this and perhaps opine as to whether increased LNG capacity here in the United States can, in any meaningful way, provide alternative supplies. I understand it's mostly symbolic right now. It does provide some, liquefied natural gas to I'm talking American LNG, to whether it's Lithuania or Poland, but I don't quite know the upside supply potential is, and I don't think it is of the size and scope that can replace Russian energy. But can it be a factor at all, or is this just symbolic? And again, connecting this to Nord Stream 2 coming online probably sooner than we expect.
So to answer the question about the Biden administration's decision to exempt from the sanctions Nord Stream 2 AG, which is the company that is building the pipeline, is going to operate the pipeline, and its CEO, former Stasi officer Matthias Warnig. This was a very, very significant decision that the Biden administration made, and we don't know the details yet about the deal with Germany. Whether it was related to the elections, so the United States doesn't appear to interfere in any way in the internal electoral process or sway the public in one way or another, whether this has something to do with another deal involving his investment in Ukraine by Germany, which Germany is talking a lot about investing in hydrogen pipelines from Ukraine to deliver about 1/8 or 1/6 of the hydrogen gas needs to Europe in the future. because frankly, if this happens, this is going to be serving as a very reliable protection of Ukraine from further Russian aggression if there is a significant German investment in Ukraine. But we don't know whether Germany is going to go through with this talk, it's going to become a plan, it's going to become reality, because Germany has shown over the years that they do not dare challenge Russia. So if Putin is against such an investment, we probably are not going to see such an investment in Ukraine. The purpose of Nord Stream 2 and Turk Stream, and before South Stream, was to avoid Ukraine as a transit country. If Nord Stream 2 is constructed and it's full at 55%, Ukraine is not going to have any Russian gas to transit anymore. The pipelines are going to be empty, the storage facilities are going to be empty, the Trans-Balkan pipeline that's going to Bulgaria and Turkey is already empty. So this is all with the purpose to hurt Ukraine, to avoid the transit through Ukraine, to bypass Ukraine. And that purpose could well be achieved if Germany allows Nord Stream 2 to be used at full capacity. This is not sure yet at the moment, because frankly, Germany does not need Nord Stream 2. Only 10 BCM of the 55 BCM capacity is going to stay in Germany. The rest is going to be diverted through the Czech Republic, to Czechia, Slovakia, and other countries in Central and Eastern Europe. So we have two diversionary pipelines that the only purpose is to avoid transit through Ukraine. And I would completely agree with Professor Yayci about diversification of energy sources, because this is exactly what Turkey did. By diversifying gas supplies, Russia lost its #1 position as a gas supplier to Turkey. Right now, Azerbaijan is the main supplier of gas to Turkey. There are new terminals, LNG terminals that were built. These supplies are also increasing, and pretty much Turk Stream is staying empty. It's delivering some gas, but not at full capacity, and probably will never be at full capacity, because we're also developing everywhere in the world, even in all producing countries, renewable energy capacities, and that's going to be a big part of the energy of the future. So a question is about Ukraine, and this is bringing us directly to the security of the Black Sea region. Is Ukraine going to be left vulnerable by giving up the Russian, denying it a Russian gas transit, because this is the kind of protection that Ukraine still has against full-scale Russian aggression, or whether we're going to give Ukraine another kind of protection, serious, significant Western investment that is going to make the country off limits to Moscow. The other thing I wanted to say regarding the sanctions exemptions that the Biden administration made, how are we going to do any kind of sanctioning of Turk Stream 2 at this moment? We gave, the United States gave a pretty bad example with Nord Stream 2. So the European Commission may not interfere to demand that this new pipeline that is going through Bulgaria and Serbia is used only at 50% and has a reserve capacity for other suppliers, as the European Gas Directive requires. This is something that it's going to be decided. Also, Nord Stream 2, we don't know how the European Commission is going to decide eventually, whether the pipeline is going to be certified, whether it's going to be put in operation, whether it's going to be fully subjected to the third energy package, to the gas directive, and used at half capacity. There are still ways and still time to do something that is going to prevent this Russian plan to completely encircle Central and Eastern Europe and squeeze it in its two pipelines and deny it alternative gas supplies, but the time is running out. The Biden administration can still implement sanctions against Nord Stream AG. It's not too late to do that. And if the pipeline continues to be built, I have the sense that Congress is going to make a decision to lift those exemptions with another piece of legislation that is going to do the job. Otherwise, Europe has a lot of potential for LNG, for import. There are so many facilities that are not used at full capacity. They're used at about 25% at the moment. They knew that they're going to be built in Greece, for example, in Alexandroupolis. The Revitusa was modernized. There are many, many ways to deliver alternative gas supplies, not only from the United States, also from other countries that are increasing their LNG deliveries around the world. But the bottom line is Russian gas and Russian oil are going to be very expensive from next year on. As soon as the European Union introduces its carbon tax, these producers that are one of the biggest polluters of the atmosphere with methane gas, they are going to be taxed the highest. Is the European consumer ready to cover this cost for Russia's pollution of the environment is something that we need to pay attention to.
Okay, well, that's a very comprehensive answer. Thank you very much, Margarita. David, I want to go back to you and ask you, we've been kind of dancing around this core issue, which is the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which obviously affects the region, but also affects more than that, affects European security and all that. What is your take? I mean, what is the Russian endgame from your perspective? Just to destabilize Ukraine and make it kind of a semi-failed state by continuing this harassment? We clearly understand that all these pincer maneuver of the as described of all these various alternative pipelines are really to deprive Ukraine of transit fees, right? In large measure, not only, but essentially so that Russia doesn't have to have the embarrassment of having to pass its own gas through the enemy territory, if you wish. But given what Russia has been doing, the annexation of Ukraine, the guerrilla warfare, facilitated and supported in Donbass, is the end game of Russia just to destabilize Ukraine? Since we couldn't have it, right? Then nobody will. Is that it? And therefore keep this kind of focus of instability in a region at the periphery of Europe and NATO, and so be it. Who cares? Is that because if we cannot have the whole thing, nobody will. Is that the Russian end game, David? Or is there another possibility from the way you see it?
Yes, I found it very interesting in the most recent military exercises that Russia undertook over the last 2 months, that the Russian forces in the Black Sea and in Crimea reportedly had a numerical advantage of 10-1 over their Ukrainian counterparts, whereas the Russian forces that were mobilized on Ukraine's eastern and northern frontiers had a numerical superiority of only 3-1. It seemed to me at the time that one intention might have been to provoke a response which would allow Russian seizure of the Kherson Oblast of Ukraine, the canal which helps bring fresh water to Crimea and so on. Failing that response on the part of Ukraine and the Western powers, what we ended up with, it seems to me, is a Russian demonstration of what Russia could do, given sufficient opportunity. Failing an actual invasion, a permanently destabilized Ukraine is most certainly to Russia's geostrategic advantage. It's been very famously said that Russia without Ukraine and Belarus is essentially an Asiatic state. I cannot imagine but that the Russian government, as long as Vladimir Putin is president, I cannot imagine that any such Russian government would not prefer to have a permanently destabilized Ukraine. One that could not therefore become part of NATO, one that could not therefore reasonably become part of the European Union. I think the same thing applies to Georgia as well, as some of the other panelists have already mentioned. These permanently destabilized countries on Russia's periphery and in the Black Sea region work to Russia's geostrategic advantage over the long term. And I would suppose that as long as Vladimir Putin is president, potentially at least out to 2036, that would remain the case. And in that case, I can't see NATO or the European Union countries doing anything to risk a confrontation, a military confrontation over that status. I would like to add, if I could, just one sort of related issue, and that is the potential political earthquake that might yet happen in Germany in September. In the event that there is a German government formed by the Green Party. As recently as January of this year, that was not presumed to be a possibility, that the Greens might enter a black-green coalition as a junior partner. There's been some interesting, as all of our panelists well know, some very interesting political shifts in Germany since the state elections in March. And there's another one, of course, coming up in June in the state of Saxony-Anhalt. And there is now a possibility, a distinct possibility of a government being formed in Germany by the Green Party, with some combination or other of junior partners, ranging from the CDU-CSU to the Free Democrats and the Social Democrats. That possibility, I think, is a wild card. As regards Ukraine, as regards the Crimea, as regards Nord Stream 2 and Turk Stream, that's going to be a very interesting development to watch.
Thank you for that. We have several questions from the audience, and we are getting into the last 30 minutes allocated to us today. Daniel, I wanted to ask you, to turn to you rather, a question from one of our participants regarding the, how can I say, the geopolitical priority that Russia may attribute to its growing or attempts to grow influence in the Black Sea region. And you mentioned before about strategic depth, right? And as a broad concept, well, it's not Napoleon or Hitler that they're confronting now, but Europe, the danger that may come from Europe, whatever they think it is. But do you believe that the concerns of Russia in the region, the Black Sea region, are on par with other concerns they may have on their western flank, on the Arctic, which we understand obviously the ice is melting, the region will be more trafficked. Russia has a strong interest. How do you see in the range of how can I say, in the context of Russian security geopolitical priorities, do you see the Black Sea region as on top of their list or not? And if so, why? How do you view this?
So before, the Nussbaum who appeared before you was the mathematician looking for larger themes amid chaos. Now the person who appears before you is Nussbaum, the economist, who looks at things through supply and demand. So Russia's got a real problem, a demographic problem. They have a declining population, they have a shortening lifespan, and if we just sort of hang on for a while, in a sense, they go away. They become a minor power with nuclear weapons and a conspiratorial mind. So when you have limited resources, you have to decide what you're going to focus on. The truth is everybody has that, but Russia has that in spades. So if we're sitting in the Kremlins, racking and stacking and prioritizing what our interests are, there's Europe, there's Black Sea, there's Arctic, there's the Pacific. I mean, those are traditional concerns. And there's the China border. And you can only allocate a certain number of resources to each of those theaters until you run out of resources. So I think what Russia's doing is what the US Army does. It says probe. If you get repulsed, go somewhere else. If you can make it through, exploit the opening. Russia is looking at its possible openings. It notices its successes in the European theater with EU, with Germany, in the Black Sea, and so it's going to continue to exploit those particular openings. I was particularly depressed at the Biden decision over the last 24 hours to say, oh, never mind on Nord Stream. It allows the Russians to continue, right? And they'll continue until somebody puts up a firm stop. So I think that everything is important to them. They exploit successes, and right now their successes are in the EU and the Black Sea until we make it more expensive to them. And that's the view from the economic front.
Thank you. We have more questions, believe it or not, on energy issues. And so I'm going to turn back to you, Professor Yayci, and also to you, Arnold. In other words, so the angles here are around the possible alternatives, which is not American LNG, but potential other sources of energy that may flow, east to west towards Europe, whether it's from Azerbaijan or Iran, or how do you view that? Do you see that there's possible to create viable alternatives or competition with the significant supplies and capacity of Russia, even though, as Margarita pointed out, these pipelines are not used at capacity. Is there room for competitors to play a larger role? Professor Yayci, how do you view that?
Yeah.
Obviously, you have a strong relations, Turkey with Azerbaijan, needless to say, but how do you view all that, Azerbaijan, Iran, as competitors for hydrocarbons?
Yeah, for the hydrocarbons, I want to give an example from the Turkish history. It is very, newly issue 10 years ago, or 10 years or 15 years ago. We have a very close relationships with the Turkic states, like Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan is also an energy supplier. So Turkmenistan wanted to sell natural gas to Turkey. What Russia did, do you know that? Russia bought whole Turkmenistan gas immediately. And then they sold to us twice of that price. So they are always very aggressive for not burning of any other alternative energy supplier in the region. And also Caspian Sea problem is a very important thing for the energy supply issues, and also for passing through the Caspian Sea, the pipelines and so forth. So that's why they want to continue Caspian Sea participation, or Caspian Sea peace and stability problem. And so they are really pressing on Caspian Sea problem. So they don't want to solve the problems in Caspian Sea, because if those problems continue, then pipelines from those states, from those countries to the Western world are not being constructed. So this is another problem. But Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, and Iran, and Qatar are the main alternatives for Turkey and for the Western world, instead of Russia. And there is an idiom in Turkish history, because we are very experienced with Russians and Russian relations. The idiom is like that: to establish a relation with Russia, it is like to go to bed with a beer, and you never know when he is going to clove you. So we have to be very careful, and Russia is very aggressive for the energy, selling and energy supplying. They want to be the major partner in the region for the energy supply. So this is very important. And also for the demographic issues is very important. I was a defense attaché in Moscow, so I know Russians very well. Russian population is 142 millions. And optimistically, half of this population is Russian. And it is greater than 28 times than Turkey in the scale of country. And 1/3 of the whole natural resources of the world is belonging to Russia. So it's a great big country, less population, and also there is many ethnic struggles in Russia. So they are so autocratic regime. So to govern and to establish, to maintain the unity, national unity and country unity. Last point. As we witness, European approach to Russia, European Union approach to Russia is very different from the United States approach. Indeed, for the implementation of the sanctions, European states, including Germany and France and the other countries, are not so willingly as much as United States. And for supporting Ukraine, this is the same case. They are not so willingly or clearly supporting Ukraine against Russia. So this is the reality. This is the reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you now, as we've covered obviously quite a bit of ground, I wanted to ask all of you to reflect on what's been said today, and if there is a broad, maybe starry-eyed objective of say, okay, what we want is peace and stability in the region, and to do whatever we can to strengthen it, or to create confidence-building measures and whatnot, based on what has emerged so far. Is the contention of you individual panelists that this is actually possible? In other words, that given the somewhat divergent views, well, we haven't really talked, I guess maybe not being unfair, we haven't really talked about Romania and Bulgaria, but I don't believe that there are particularly, maybe you can correct me, specific views that would make them divergent from what NATO believes or wants to do in the region. But it seems to me that here we have Turkey, as the professor has explained to us, that has obviously a historic and interest and a geographic interest, and that again, as the custodian of the Straits and everything, to foster stability in a region that affects Turkish stability, immediately. But then we have Russia as sort of as a spoiler, and the efforts to destabilize Ukraine. What goes on sort of the northern shore of the Black Sea, and so can we reconcile all this and say, okay, but all this notwithstanding, we can have confidence-building measures. We can have, I don't know, maritime exercises with everybody joining in and proving that there are no, how can I say, aggressive purposes, and that that we all share, even though with different perspectives, a goal to keep the Black Sea peaceful region. what's your view now, based on all the things that have come out? Is there anything that has been said by any of your fellow panelists that would make you change your mind on anything? Starting with you, Arnie. How's that? Now I'm throwing that to you.
Well, thanks, Paolo. But let me take a step back, because you mentioned an interesting point that I want to address, which is the smaller countries, Romania and Bulgaria, and I think we're seeing activity there in strong activity by Russia in a coercive manner to undermine their governments. And they've been very successful in Moldova and Bulgaria, and they're doing the same thing in Romania. So there's multiple layers of activity going on, not purely with energy, not purely with direct action against Ukraine, but in these cases, these are again fairly aggressive, and I'd say in the case of Moldova and maybe Romania, Bulgaria, I'd say very successful efforts to undermine their governments in certain ways. So there's that aspect of these are now also certainly Romania and Bulgaria are NATO members and EU members, and they seem to be backsliding from their traditional goals or the basic merits of joining these organizations was to establish a liberal type of a democratic institutions, which now they're sort of diverting. Other countries you could say are doing the same thing, but these are other efforts that we're seeing in the Black Sea region that are underway, that are very much under the radar, that people are not really recognizing that. So, so getting back to means of establishing stability, I think that is one key way, is to reaffirm good governance, reaffirm these basic institutions in these countries. How you do that is through clearly to combat these types of coercive activities. And we Margarita, Dan, and David, and I, and several others are involved in a NATO project addressing hybrid warfare. And this is certainly a key aspect. This malign influence is a key aspect of hybrid warfare. How we need to push back on using strategic communications on these types of activities. Again, much easier said than done, because the Russians are willing to put a lot of money into these activities to essentially to pay off these institutions in these countries. So there's that aspect, which is a strategic, sort of like the old Cold War era, Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, try and reinvigorate those as ways to counteract this activity. We talked earlier about these existing institutions such as Black Sea Force and 3 Seas, to try and initiate this.
Sorry to interrupt. We also have a question to expand on the 3 Cs, to explain how that makes any from the audience, how that makes or could make any difference compared to other instruments that may already exist. If you could perhaps focus on that a little bit more to clarify this to our audience. Thank you.
Sure. The 3 Seas initiative goes back, I'd say, roughly 10 years. Someone may be able to correct me on the exact date, but it's a rough grouping of the states that are sort of sandwiched between the Baltic Sea in the north, the Adriatic, and the Black Sea. So these countries have an informal grouping. They meet once or twice a year, discuss security, economic issues, and that may be a more one way of addressing some of these issues. I think U.S. is an observer. I think Russia is an observer, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe David can correct me as far as membership is involved, but that could be one of the. NATO may not be the appropriate venue for this, because it has such a strong reaction from Russia, for instance. So this may be another venue that we could use to as developing these confidence building measures. So 3 Cs, again, an informal grouping of like-minded countries in the region, at least looking at these topics. That's one venue. There's these can range from energy to good governance to really any kind of economic and political activities. So that's very broadly, very briefly, that's 3 Cs.
All right. So thank you for that. Let's go around. As I said, we are a little bit constrained for time right now. But David, sorry, Daniel, my apologies. Any concluding thoughts from your end based on this conversation today?
I'm always delighted to be on panels with the people that I have been on panels with before, and now with Admiral Yayci. Thank you very much for joining us. Yes, Teşekkür ederim. You know, all things considered, I'd rather be in the US or the EU with our problems than in the Kremlin with their problems. We always look at them as aggressive, push, push, push. We have to defend, defend, defend. Personally, I prefer offense, not defense. But the truth is, the West sort of takes a defensive stand. We do the slow and steady, and we hope that they don't act in a swift, decapitating way. We have always put our bets on slow and steady, as Arnie said, with Radio Free Europe and the emphasis on good governance, et cetera, et cetera. That's where we've put our bets. We hope that they do not swiftly decapitate us and undo all that. Otherwise, I believe in it. And I believe that in the longer run, for odd reasons like the rule of law and entrepreneurial spirit and things like that, the West actually wins the long game. But that's partly a matter of faith and some data. But thank you for thank you, Paolo, for organizing, and thank you.
And thank you for being with us, Professor Yayci. Any thoughts from your end, you know, regarding how you see this, given the fact that, I repeat myself, you are probably, you know, closer to the action than most of us. So how do you view? Are you hopeful in terms of the Turkish government's goals of increased stability, or at least maintaining a certain level of stability in the region, given all these tensions that we've been discussing today? What do you say?
Thank you very much, Professor Schirach. So the bottom line, the main thing is not to try to increase the tension. Our aim should be to decrease the tension. So key factor is to motivate the regional ownership initiatives and regional cooperation. So also the problems around Black Sea shouldn't be widened, and whole problems shouldn't put to one basket. So problems should be solved separately, and all problems shouldn't be mixed. This is the key factor. And also, littoral states should activate the regional initiatives. It is the only platform they can communicate with each other. So this is the key factor. So Black Sea 4 is the key platform to talk with each other. Any other platform is, no other platform is available except United Nations. For all those states can communicate with each other except Black Sea 4 and except United Nations. And last point, Turkey is not a custodian of straits. Turkey is the owner of the states. It is very clear. So it is our sovereignty. I should point out, but custodian of the passage regime.
That's right.
Yeah, that's the point. And thank you very much for inviting me. It was a great panel, and I am very honored to be with whole participants, all panelists, who are very valuable, very prestigious members of the academia.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. We're very pleased to have you. David, your thoughts on where we're headed here, and then Margarita will have the honor of closing the event today.
Allow me, if I could, simply to reiterate first my appreciation for today's event and my participation with all of my fellow panelists. As always, it's a terrific group to work with, and I'm honored to be able to do so. I fear I'm somewhat more pessimistic regarding the medium-term success of confidence-building measures and so on, in light of the sort of the so-called power vertical in Russia. I do not know, not being an expert on Russian domestic politics, whether parliamentary elections and so on, which are scheduled there for the fall of this year, would necessarily fundamentally alter that power vertical, at the top of which, of course, sits Mr. Putin. I would have thought, however, that without some sort of thoroughgoing or fundamental change in that governing structure in Russia, that overtures made by Turkey and by the EU and by the Three Seas Initiative and by NATO would not necessarily bring fruit in the medium term, as long as Mr. Putin heads the sort of government that he currently heads. So I fear I'm somewhat more pessimistic, though I think Dan's on the right, he's made the right bet in the long term. I would have to say that too. So again, I guess I'm rather more pessimistic.
Thank you. Margarita, to you the honor of giving us your own sort of parting thoughts on all this.
As somebody who was born and grew up in the Balkans, in the Black Sea region, Russia has very strong influence in Bulgaria, less in Romania. There has been the historical resentment to Russia and the Soviet Union from the time the Soviet Union occupied Moldova. But this is why they have RT television in Romania for that particular reason. But in Bulgaria, the undermining of the democratic institutions, the capturing of the institutions at the moment through different ways, not necessarily Russian influence, but also different criminal interests. This is very dangerous. So what I would say is, apart from standing up to Russia, because Russia is a bully and it needs to be countered with force, not with compromise. Compromise is empowering Russia. It's making us look weak, and we are disrespected as a result of that. But apart from dealing with Russia, is strengthening the institutions in countries such as Bulgaria, strengthening democracies in countries such as Hungary, protecting Ukraine, because if we don't do that, we already have voices in Bulgaria calling for reversing of the decision to be a NATO member. There are Russophile parties that are putting this on the agenda, calling for a referendum on the subject. This is very, very dangerous, because a NATO member country should not be having this discussion anymore, but this is what reality is. There were elections in April. They did not produce a government. There will be another election now in July that is not going to produce another government, and a third election probably in 1 year in the fall that may end up with a government that is much more pro-Russian than the previous one. As we know, the president of Bulgaria has been always opposing sanctions against Russia because of the annexation of Crimea. So looking into the stability of these countries internally, their democracy building, their institution building, the public trust in the institutions, boosting the investment that the West can make in those countries to make the life of people there better, so that they're not so disappointed by the change from communism to democracy, that would be extremely important. Changes in Russia will probably not come through any kind of elections, any kind of democratic institutions. Changes in Russia may come as the regions are becoming more uneasy with the center, as they demand more self-governance, they demand more autonomy, and there are so many protests in those regions right now in Russia that this is the thing that needs to be watched and needs to be really made sure people in Russia know what is happening in other regions, because the media there is not reliable, in order for the population of Russia to really take matters in their hands. The more protests we see, the weaker Putin will become, the more concessions we could see with Ukraine and with other issues. But also we have to have in mind, the weaker Russian government becomes, the more aggressive it could become. As we say in our part of the world, and Professor Yayci knows that the snake bites the worse when it's dying.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Well, with this very optimistic final parting thought, but it's better to be realistic than starry-eyed. I want to thank all of you. First, I want to thank my good friend and colleague Denise Caritas, who, as always, puts all these events together for Bay Atlantic University and the Global Policy Institute. I want to thank Professor Yayci for joining us from Bahçeşehir University in Istanbul. And again, heartfelt thanks to Arnold for his efforts and really helping us out in gathering his esteemed colleagues. Thanks to all of you. Thanks, Professor Dorondo. Nice to have you. We'll have you again, Margarita and Daniel from California. Now you can really, after this energizing early morning meeting, you can get your own day forward. Thanks to our audience for being with us and for the interesting questions we got. And so we stand adjourned. Thank you very much.